Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Nikolai from Postgres AI, and this is Postgres TV interview. And today we have a great guest, Everett Berry from Vantage, right? Or did I pronounce it right?
Vantage. Yep, that's right. Yeah, nice to be here.
Thank you for coming. And as usual, I have some issue with sound. Sorry, I do it like third time in a row. Okay. Sorry. I need to find where I lost. 1 second. Sorry. So we discussed today cost savings, and I think this is a great topic for these crisis days because we see a lot of layoffs, right? So the idea is to try to save on infrastructure costs and to help to save some jobs, probably, right? This is like obvious idea for these days. And like where should we start? I compiled a doc, like brainstorm doc, and I think it's a good compilation of at least our both ideas. Like you already also put some ideas. I have it in description already in this video, and let me put it to chat as well. This is like, okay, we can save costs for infrastructure in general, but we can focus on database particularly, right? Because database is usually it's a big player in terms of budget spending and so on, right? It can consume compute, storage for like operational purposes, like to store the database itself. And it also usually takes some space, sometimes significant in the object storage for backups, right? Am I missing anything or?
So
Roughly.
Compute, storage, backups, and you may include data transfer in that, but you're absolutely right. Vantage maintains a cloud cost leaderboard where we rank the amount of spend on all the AWS services, and RDS and databases are always number 2, right behind EC2 and in front of S3.
And EC2 means maybe some more databases, but just self-managed there, right? We don't know.
That's true. Yeah, just compute in general. But even so, RDS and even Redshift costs are extremely significant drivers of the overall AWS bill.
Yeah, sorry that I didn't properly made the introduction. So indeed, like your company is specifically aiming to help others to save on infrastructure budgets. And so, okay, number 2, okay. But Aurora also some additional thing is IO costs, but it's maybe some like something extra and not usual for other types of Postgres setups, right? So
that's right. So according to AWS, IOPS and provisioned IOPS are typically the number 1 portion of RDS costs. And the amount of IOPS you need is a function of the amount of storage you have, your workload, the randomness of the reads and writes, as well as the instance size. So the thing with costs with Vantage is it starts high level. And in fact, Vantage tracks costs across not only AWS, but other infrastructure providers like Snowflake, Databricks, Azure, Datadog. And then you can go extremely deep into the bill. And so for databases, for example, you can start at just baseline RDS costs. You can do things like buy reserved instances, make sure snapshots are archived, go through and optimize your IOPS. And then you can go all the way down into the individual queries that are running, where they're running, how often they're running. And so it's cost optimization is an endless rabbit hole. And I think my experience advantage is that it's really a game of picking what's going to be the biggest impact, because you can save money everywhere, but some things save significantly more money with significantly less effort than others.
Right. So the idea is to find the biggest, like low-hanging fruits first, right? And
right, exactly.
Biggest. Yeah. By the way, also, like I'm trying to catch up in terms of introduction. I did poor job, definitely. Like wanted to say thank you for maintaining EC2 instances.info, which I use many years already, and it's extremely useful because AWS doesn't have like single page price comparison for EC2 and RDS, and you fix this problem, and it's great.
Yes, thank you. Well, it wasn't me. EC2 instances.info is actually more than 10 years old. It's almost as old as AWS itself. And Vantage acquired it last year. And it's been a lot of fun to maintain it and make improvements to it. So we've added pricing now for Elasticache, Redshift, and OpenSearch, which happen to be all the services that support reserved instances, and fixed a number of bugs. And we've also added individual detail pages for every RDS and EC2 instance. So there's a lot more information to go through, and it's open source as well. So people can submit additional ideas for things and information that they want to see. One of which relates to RDS, was submitted this week, and I can actually demo it later in the call related to IOPS.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we have limited time, so just dive straight into the document we yesterday created, like collaborated, and I hope others will participate as well, because I consider this document as like brainstorm community effort, and like how to optimize infrastructure under Postgres, right, for Postgres. And it starts, maybe like I will be improving it and restructure it, but right now it starts with a comparison cloud versus on-premise or bare metal, and I expected, like we both optimize. I mean, my company also optimizes costs, but we targeted only on Postgres and we do it manually. Your like approach is very like more sophisticated, automated, and it's great to have like side from different opinion from different side, actually. So I didn't expect that you will be willing to discuss moving out of clouds, but you said right before this call that you are ready. Let's briefly maybe discuss this. Because,
yeah, so I'm happy to talk about cloud versus no cloud. I think doesn't have to be the black and white thing that people make it out to be. I actually think the two examples in this document are very interesting and speak to what the cloud is good at and what the cloud is not good at. So very recently, Basecamp, or 37 Signals, and DHH in particular, has published a lot of their internal statistics about what they were spending on AWS and how much they've saved since they moved off. And I think the numbers were $3 million a year on AWS. And they have supposedly purchased a very large Dell servers for sort of a fraction of that cost, and they operate them now.
Right.
And actually reading through that blog and listening to the discussion around that, I think they made the right choice. And the reason is because their workload does not really get a lot of benefit from the cloud. I mean, let's take hey.com, which is email services. I would expect that would be steadily growing, perhaps not explosively growing, and also a fairly consistent load. So not a lot of seasonality. I think people are probably sending email all day, every day. And so in that case, it really does make financial sense to, perhaps just buy an additional bare metal server every month and scale your services that way. I would contrast that to something like Netflix, which sees explosive demand during the evening hours and on the weekends, and needs probably 100% or more servers than they do during their lowest downtime. Or something like Zoom, where there's a famous anecdote during COVID that Zoom was adding, I think, 10,000 EC2 servers a day in sort of the peak of their demand in March and April of 2020. So there are capabilities that the cloud provides that you just cannot get on-prem. But if your workload looks a lot more like 37 Signals, then on-prem can make sense. A similar story with Dropbox here. The storage premium that AWS charges is significant. This is actually where Cloudflare is competing very heavily with the launch of R2 against S3. And so for Dropbox, moving their storage workloads onto bare metal servers, where they understand roughly how much they're going to grow, how much they need to buy. They probably don't see a lot of elastic demand. So they see a pretty consistent number of requests, you know, day over day, week over week. That also is a great place to move off the cloud or to have a hybrid model. I think Dropbox actually probably does have cloud data centers that they may do other things on.
So you're saying that if your workload is unpredictable, for example, if it's a news service and news happen suddenly, right, and we have spikes in traffic, compared to Dropbox, where you can forecast much better your spending next month and so on. So it means like your argument is that clouds are better for unpredicted patterns of workload, right?
That's right. Yeah, they provide flexibility, and they do provide, in my view, a lower cost of ownership as long as your workload changes dramatically. We're releasing some data today that shows that during Q4, the lowest day for on-demand spend in December was 100% lower than the highest day. And so a company with a demand that changes a lot during the year, during the holidays, is really going to save a lot of money on the cloud. And likewise, capacity planning for that with bare metal servers is going to be more challenging. So yeah, I do think it's not totally cut and dry, cloud or no cloud. I would also say that the classic argument is that the operational overhead of doing it yourself is high, and I do agree with that. I think even doing things like maintaining a Postgres cluster on EC2 it takes effort and investment versus RDS, but
of course, significant compared to yes. We started to recommend RDS long ago because if it's a small company, they don't have DBA and they don't want to pay for DBA support constantly, go with RDS or similar service. What do you think about an analogy like with co-working versus owning an office? Is it fair to have this analogy? Because if you're a small company, you probably start with co-working and you have flexibility and pay for just space for some hours. But when you're a large company, you should probably have your own building or rent your big building and so on. What do you think?
I think that seems right. I think the other way to talk about that analogy with co-working, and I think one of the value props of co-working is now you can have offices all around the world. And that's also true of the cloud, right? The handling traffic at the edge, deploying, large media files to all different countries around the world is much easier in the cloud. So actually,
with predictable level of service. So if it's like some network of co-working which operates in many places, they have similar, like they have printers or like coffee and so on, and your people can expect the similar level of service. That's right. For clouds, it's the same.
Yep. I think it's a strong analogy.
Interesting. Okay, but we started with this. Like, I don't want to spend a lot of time because it's not purely database topic. But I wanted to mention that obviously our viewers are not only working in very large projects; many are working in small startups, and I myself created several startups before PostgreSQL, not database related, and we used Postgres. And the latest was some kind of social media, and it was bootstrapped. So I counted my money very carefully, and it was on Hetzner because it's low coster. And I liked their service a lot because if you want to save every penny and you are ready to run your Postgres and other stuff yourself with your engineers, it's a great option. So here I'm comparing prices. It's like recent comparison I did in this document, and it looks like okay. I didn't take Hetzner Cloud. They have cloud as well. And they have a couple of regions in the US, but those regions doesn't seem to have multiple data centers like availability zones at all. Like it's like single as like poor man's cloud as I see it. But the price is like 5x compared to EC2 instances, 5x or even more. Of course, if you go to, like, there are two levels here. Do you manage Postgres yourself? And also, are you responsible for replacing disks and so on? Maybe three levels, actually. If we talk about low-cost clouds like Hetzner Cloud, or they provide, you can rent servers there. It's also an interesting option. There is some startup cost for each server. Replacing disks takes time. And yeah, like and also you need to know how to check SSD, because sometimes they provide all the SSD, like you can see errors with smart check. If you like, you're not, it's not a good idea to run the Postgres on it. But it's interesting, like huge cost savings. What do you think about like these smaller companies? And like, again, it's not like co-working, but maybe it's working from garage where you're responsible for your, like, this is what I do. This is my garage, actually. So
Yeah.
small startup and so on. What do you think about this for small
Again, it's definitely true that the initial cost is so much lower. And for someone like you that's very skilled with Postgres, I think it does make sense. I have been in the Postgres world for several years, and I still don't enjoy applying patches and doing security updates and things like this.
Backups, failover, replication.
Yeah, exactly. And so when all of that is taken care of, that's for me a premium that I'm willing to pay. But your point stands. If the dollar, if spending money is the absolute, spending the least money is the absolute number one priority, then Hetzner and some of these others are
OVH also there, like,
yep.
good option. Yeah, and like let me honest, like to be honest, for example, Postgres AI is running in GCP, Kubernetes cluster, Postgres in Kubernetes, like very like modern approach and so on. But like, very honestly, it's Postgres 11, I think, or very, very old Postgres, because we don't have time to properly maintain it. Right. And right now I'm thinking to move it to Hetzner Cloud because we have US regions. I'm like concerned about this lack of multi-Z approach, but still thinking about it. And K3s.io, I think this is like small, optimized Kubernetes you can run yourself. It's interesting. So I really think to move and to migrate, and I expect big reduction in costs, and we can manage this ourselves. So why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have Postgres or Kubernetes in here. And the thing with Kubernetes is you actually do start to get some of the benefits of the cloud wherever you're running it. And so for example, you get nice failover, you get relatively easy rolling upgrades, you get just a number of primitives that the cloud sort of...
It takes time to fix small, simple things and make, for example, two nodes working in two different data centers, availability zones. Sometimes it's so difficult because, like anti-affinity thing, right? So it requires some time to learn simple tasks that can be done in different case, like easily, can be a time waster here, unfortunately, in the case of Kubernetes. But do you think Kubernetes can be a killer for clouds in some cases?
Yeah, and Vantage is really deepened our support for Kubernetes because of that in the last year. So there's a new project called OpenCost. It's in many ways the gold standard for monitoring Kubernetes costs. It's a cloud native computing foundation project. And this can actually be installed directly in your cluster and connected to a visualization tool like Vantage or another tool which accepts data from Prometheus, basically. And thereby you can treat your Kubernetes cluster like it is a cloud, and you can get a billing interface and a cost management solution that sort of mirrors what you would have in the cloud, but it would be connected to your cluster wherever it's running. So OpenCost supports AWS, GCP, Azure, and also on-prem, which can actually be really nice for customers that might have a hybrid setup. So you may have a Kubernetes cluster that is split across multiple things, or at least a a service that it relies on Kubernetes clusters across multiple environments. And this is where kind of that consolidated billing and just getting a handle on where costs are coming from, what services, labels, namespaces, that's a great first step to just understand where the costs are. And then you can start to dive into optimization and say things like, okay, this namespace is 50% higher than the other ones that we're running.
How does the service know the money part? How like for cloud providers, smaller cloud providers, like very small.
That's true. So
how do
for
you do that?
the large guys, there's price sheets that are included. And then for on-prem, you would need to upload your own, let's say Kepner, for
user
example.
maintains I see.
That's right. You would basically add a file that says, okay, this server is costing me, $200 a month. And then OpenCost will take care of sort of divvying up that cost among the Kubernetes primitives that it operates on.
Yeah, interesting. It's like accounting service for infrastructure. Interesting.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move to more Postgres databases and so on. Okay. Let's leave it. It is because of course we can discuss it longer. But what about higher level? Like okay, we decided to be in clouds, self-managed versus fully managed by RDS, GCP, Cloud SQL, Azure, Citus, or like anything else. New players like Timescale, Ivan, Neon, Supabase, they have differences, of course, like some try to add some new value to Postgres, some just try to compete with RDS directly, like Ivan. Like, what do you think in general? How to, for example, to compare costs because, okay, should I hire a couple of DBAs or go to some companies who provide services to keep Postgres running and backups and so on, or versus RDS? How to approach this comparison? In your opinion?
So the first interesting fact I can share on this is that as EC2 and RDS prices are dropping over time,
they do.
They drop as in you get a better price to performance ratio, right? So a new instance comes out and it's more powerful for sometimes a little more or roughly the same cost, and therefore you get more out of that instance and you need, let's say, fewer instances in your cluster. But as this has been happening, EC2 prices have been dropping faster than RDS prices, or let's say the price to performance ratio on EC2 is currently better than it is on RDS. And so that means that with the latest generation instances, particularly Graviton instances, if you are self-hosting Postgres on EC2 Graviton instances, you're running in probably the most efficient way that you can in the cloud.
RDS also has Graviton.
That's true. RDS also has Graviton, but there would be that added sort of service premium for RDS versus...
and it's huge. It's huge, like 60, 70, 80%.
That's right. Yeah, there's a significant amount of margin built in as you start to move from EC2 to the managed services on AWS. And that's true of other clouds. So I think the variables that you have to play with, it kind of comes down to how large does the team have to be to self-manage this cluster on EC2 versus running it on RDS, which can probably be handled by like half of a backend engineer in general.
Right.
And so as the cluster gets larger, that's where I think self-managing becomes more and more the move, right? Because it's your cluster,
or number of clusters. So either a cluster itself or number of clusters. So it's like
or number of clusters, right? So your entire database workload may grow exponentially larger, right? As the company ingests more and more data and so forth. But it's unlikely that the number of DBAs or DevOps folks, SREs that you need to maintain that cluster will also grow exponentially. So you may need one DBA for 100 gigabyte cluster. Maybe you need 5 DBAs for 100 terabyte cluster, right? And so in that case, the cost savings that you get to self-manage really start to add up as the cluster gets larger, because the cost of the servers scales with the size of the workload.
But let
So
me disagree here with you. If you run 100 terabytes on RDS, by the way, is it possible maybe they have a limit like 64? I don't remember already from top of my head, but when you're on the edge for some capabilities and you start experiencing, probably you will have a lot of TPS as well, and you start experiencing nasty issues, which will happen both on self-managed and managed Postgres, and Amazon AWS won't help you here a lot because they cannot connect to it actually, right? So they don't go and troubleshoot. They only troubleshoot at that lower level only, right? So, and sometimes in my case, support it's not very knowledgeable. Sometimes it is. So my trick was usually, if I feel lack of Postgres deep knowledge, I just recreate issue and chat with different guy, and I'm very lucky usually on the second step, if not the first one. But they can only give you general advice, pieces of advice sometimes. That being said, I find Aurora's documentation on wait events is the most interesting for regular Postgres as well. I usually recommend it for regular Postgres, even if you not on Aurora, still good documentation. But my idea is if you're on the edge of capabilities, like breaking some walls, like sub-transactions with GitLab, we did like break some walls. You probably won't be helped by cloud provider a lot. You need the expertise already in-house.
So I think I might be saying, basically, as the cluster gets larger, you should consider moving more and more to EC2 versus RDS.
Right.
And I think
start with RDS and then move.
That's right. Yeah. And so I think that would be probably the number one variable. And like you said, the troubleshooting to actually start to modify some of the, like, I would say more hardcore Postgres internals to make things work at very large scale. That's easier on EC2. And likewise, the cost savings are greater on EC2. So
there are big companies which I actually agree with you, but there are big companies also among our customers which don't agree with us. they move towards RDS and they are happy that they don't need to think about backups and replication anymore.
Absolutely.
Sometimes
I will say with RDS, I know we'll get to some of the financial primitives that are available. When you start introducing reserved instances and you start introducing some cost optimization techniques, then the discussion becomes even more nuanced because you can start to achieve parity with EC2 and RDS costs and get the benefits of fully managed. But so yeah, so that I think
how can you do that? So it should be always more expensive. RDS should
so it will always be more expensive, but the scaling will start to not be as extreme. So for example, if you start to apply 3-year all upfront reserved instances to RDS, you can drop the cost by close to 60%. And so that's where you may say, okay, well, I could invest a lot in moving my workload from RDS to EC2, or I could flip on these contracts, which allow me to just save money instantly. And so that's where I think some large teams will look at that and say, good enough savings and also benefits of self-manage. And they may not even really deeply consider the EC2 option, even though in a ideal world, that would save them even more money.
Yeah, but 3 years, it's quite a big commitment, right? So what if in 1 year I don't need it anymore? So you have something for it, right?
That's right. Yeah. So so this is actually where maybe the pendulum might swing back. So Vantage has a service called Autopilot, which buys and sells reserved instances on customers' behalf. And so it monitors the usage of the workload, and it will automatically make purchases of these 3-year no upfront instances. Now, the thing with these instances is they have to be held for 30 days, but then they can be sold on the AWS RI marketplace, where customers buy and sell commitments that they no longer are making use of.
Like secondary market.
The problem with doing this is that when you're a single company, you don't have a lot of knowledge about which instances are easy to sell, what other workloads you might be able to match up with, and so forth. And so one of the major benefits that Autopilot provides is that it's installed across a large amount of the Vantage customer base. And so we have this proprietary view of reserved instance liquidity, which allows us to swap instances between customers. And I should put quotes around that because it's not what's actually happening. We are still listing the instance on the reserved instance marketplace and then buying it immediately for another customer. But it's the knowledge of which workloads can be matched up to do this that make a service like Autopilot. And there are other providers that have a service like this. Autopilot is the cheapest at 5% of savings, but there are others. But that's what makes a service like this really nice. It's almost like pooling together your resources to achieve savings. Now, there is no selling of reserved instances on RDS, Elasticache, Redshift, and OpenSearch. So that discussion is different. And we actually have a product for that we can get into at some point. But at least for EC2, you can effectively achieve the benefits of on-demand with these huge discounts, up to 72% discounts that come with reserved instances.
Yeah, interesting. And like, when do you think it already, at what scale this starts to be worth using this approach?
Oh, it can be useful immediately. We have customers saving $100 a month using Autopilot, and we have customers saving,
a lot. Yeah.
I shouldn't share exact numbers, I suppose, but extremely large workloads. And so it actually like scales up and down very nicely. Yeah.
Okay, this is from bottom. What about from top? Isn't it better to go directly to cloud provider and negotiate some huge discount if you're spending millions like Basecamp did?
Yeah. So
they spend millions. I'm not sure if they negotiate a discount. Maybe they should press harder, right?
So I will tell you that there are discounting programs available from AWS and so forth. It's unlikely to be as deep of a discount. It's still worth pursuing. And I'm actually not sure whether those programs can be combined with purchasing reserved instances and so forth. I imagine they may be able to, but the discount on a three-year reserved instance or no upfront reserved instance, I believe is like 66%, up to 72% for an all upfront, which to put a fine point on it, the no upfront means that you don't send AWS any cash to buy the instance. It's purely a financial contract. So there's no cash flow impact.
Just commitment, right?
Right. But yeah, the very large companies will engage with AWS or another providers. AWS calls theirs an enterprise discount program. And typically the spend is very significant. So I remember from a few years back, Snapchat negotiated, I think, $1 billion a year of spend with, or maybe it was $1 billion over several years of spend with Google Cloud. And so for them, they lock that in, and that's what they're going to spend. There's kind of no additional discounts that they're going to do for that. Now, the trick with that is it's a commitment to spend. So when you make a commitment to AWS or a cloud provider like that, you have to spend the money no matter what. So
or to pay some fines probably if you don't.
Well, it's not fines. It's just like I'm going to commit to spending. This year I spent $15 million. I'm going to commit to spending $10 million next year. And I made some cost optimizations. I'm only going to spend. Right. I'm only going to actually spend $8 million, and then I still have $2 million left over that. Whether or not I use that, I owe that to AWS. So
otherwise it's a lawsuit or I thought it's just some fine. That's it. Okay. So
it's a financial contract that you've engaged in. So
you need to pay anyway.
You need to pay anyway. Yeah. So, and there's some interesting things that companies do when they have a gap like that. But in general, that's sort of nothing comes for free with the cloud, right? That's sort of the trade-off is AWS says, we're going to lock you into this level of spend.
So I can imagine this example is interesting. So you optimize too much we still owe money, so
That's
you
right.
shouldn't
Yeah,
optimize that. You
that's
should
right.
optimize later. Yeah, next
And
year.
I would say at the larger levels, for some of these companies, the concern becomes less around just actually saving money, which you're right is at the very large levels of spend becomes easier by just negotiating directly with AWS. Becomes more about where the spend is going. So what's the margin on my software service that I deliver? Which apps are more costly? Which teams are spending more money? And so, we've talked a lot about cost savings here in Autopilot, but the majority of Vantage's business actually is around cost visibility and simply helping teams know where their spend is going. And at the very large level, that's more of the problem to solve. Let's say you have over 1,000 AWS member accounts across 10,000 engineers and so forth. At that scale, the problem is less about saving money and more about just knowing where the costs are going.
For example, someone provisioned Postgres instance and forgot about it, and it's not being used, and only half a year later we realized
That's
that,
right.
This is quite common story, and like, what's the solution here? Is there any silver bullet to prevent this to happen again?
Well, there is a standard set of practices around creating alerts for things, and that is something that companies should do right away. We help customers do this by detecting anomalies in spend.
What is anomaly?
So anomaly would be, let's say my average RDS cost is $100 per day, and then one day it's $500, and then it resets. And so that anomaly, that $500 day, is going to be detected by Vantage, and then you can configure like a Slack alert or a Teams alert to immediately know. Well, immediately is not quite the right term because it is based on when the billing data arrives, but to know very shortly that spend has occurred, and then you can alert on that type of spend before. And so, so companies will set up alerts for the things they care about in that regard. And this is another thing where the visibility is nice, because with something like Vantage, you could combine, let's say, your Datadog monitoring with your self-managed Postgres on EC2 and combine that all into one report, and then alert on those costs. Whereas for something like raw AWS billing alerts, you would only get visibility into what the AWS service is doing and not what some of the other services that impact your complete infrastructure bill would be doing.
Yeah, interesting. We don't have a lot of time left. We decided that it will be like 45 minutes roughly. But
I can actually go for another 20 minutes if
okay, great. I can do it. Great. So it will be like 1 hour. Thank you. Question about
I can
this.
Show you some of the.
Yeah, let's do some demo and probably return to the what will be left. But the particular question, I have this provisioned long ago. Anomaly, there are no anomalies, right? So it's not very instance. For example, we have 100 instances, it's just one instance, but it's not used. This is like it's not fair that I'm paying for it, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so
I mean, somebody should check the actual usage and say, you don't use this. Why are you paying for this? Either decide to continue, or it's also anomaly, right? No. What do you think about
true.
this?
You can create you can look at things like CloudWatch metrics or other monitoring to combine the bills you're getting with the actual service usage of the instance, and then go ahead and turn instances off. I would say that
I would like to have this automatically. Instead, like I would like to have this automatic service to report that this is money, this is actual usage, and there is inconsistency here in terms of like your expectations. So you should probably shut it down, or at least stop it. Or
yeah, absolutely. That would be something like creating a budget and creating an alert. But yeah, I agree. Like specifically for development or continuous integration clusters, these are the kinds of things that hopefully should scale down if they're set up.
Well, we here we talk about of course, cloud. those people who develop cloud services, they're quite smart. So there is serverless approach now.
That's
This
right.
scale to zero approach, and this is answer from services. But if I use regular EC2 instances and regular RDS, I would like to have some service that would report about usage versus budget for each resource. Maybe I would expect this to be automated maybe at some point. This is my personal experience in many cases. It happens, and this, like in some particular case, very large customer, I told about various kinds of optimizations, and they said we experienced this particular problem. People provision some like test instances and forget about them, and we are hunting to shut them down and delete those instances. This is we don't think about query optimization yet. This is our problem right now.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I do think there's a part 2 of this, which talks more about queries and data and so forth. But part 1, and really the part that Vantage deals with, is just what's going on the infrastructure level versus like more of the services or application level.
Not looking at metrics like CPU usage or queries per second.
So we do integrate with CloudWatch, and so you can see some of that. But in general, the approach is not to make active infrastructure changes to customer accounts.
But it should be reports, not changes. I mean, like some alerts maybe also, right? So if CPU usage is 0 during whole day and I'm paying a lot, why should I keep it, right? It could be okay. Maybe it's just a proposal. Consider it as a proposal.
You bet.
Okay. So you're sharing screen or?
Yeah, sure. Let me. So first of all, this is EC2 instances. So this is the tool that I maintain. And here, of course, you can see all of the pricing for all of the different RDS instances. You can even see the reserved costs as well. So you can kind of toggle this to get different preferences here. You can change it to be monthly and so forth. And then you can see costs for all the other types of services that are available. So I could look at specifically, I could compare Aurora versus Postgres and so forth. And this tool has been around for a long time, and it's open source, so you can check it out on GitHub and so forth.
Again, I'm using it all the time, many years. So.
Absolutely. And I do want to talk about a brand new feature that we just added to this, which is actually, I'll switch to localhost for this, but it's in the process of being deployed, which is IOPS. And so we talked a little bit about provisioned IOPS for RDS. And there's a couple of footguns that can occur. So let's take my T4 medium instance here, T4G medium. And now on EC2 instances, you can now see the IOPS and the throughput and the bandwidth for each of these servers. And so a problem that people will have is their database will run into will start to have spikes in CPU usage or start to have slow queries and so forth. And so they will provision IOPS for this database in an attempt to make sure that resolves that issue. But what can happen is, let's say if I'm running on this instance here, which is a DBR4 large, this instance can only serve a maximum of 3,000 IOPS. And so if I provision 5,000 IOPS, if I create that in RDS, I'm not even going to be able to use all of those IOPS. And so it's very important to be able to match up the IO needs of your application with the instance size that you have. Another interesting tip I heard on this, which is actually
let me comment here, because just small stop here. I witnessed it many times. Like engineers, especially if company has microservices, many teams, RDS, people come to the database team and say, there is a problem with performance here. DBAs look, database experts look at the instance. It's okay, this is some small instance, and storage is very weak. So you cannot get like 1,000 TPS here with such type of storage. You should improve it. And like, since they are already understand the problem, they improve it a lot. And they forget to check the instance limits. This is exactly, I think it's happening all the time everywhere. And I think, of course, AWS could and other cloud providers could warn about it. It's like unfair. I think it's just unfair. They know it. Like this limits for this instance, and you attached the disk. It's only this instance uses this disk, right?
That's right.
So it's just some bad thing from cloud providers, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And
also, well, just not to forget small feature requests. If for EC2 instances, if one column or two columns would be sticky or frozen, instance
that is a
name,
good idea. Yeah,
it would
that
be
would
much
nice.
better, because I forgot which row it is.
I'll have to open an issue for you right away.
Great. Thank you.
The last thing I'd show on this is that we now have these detail pages here. So you can get a really nice page of all of the data for the instance, and also scroll through the different types of the instance.
Can you return? I'm very old user. I didn't see this page yet. How to get here?
These are the linked in all of the columns now. So you can click in here and you can see, well, this is on the live site, so there's a little bit more here, but you can see all the different types of instances or at least see them within their instance family and the different sizes. So, but yeah, like we said at the beginning, I'm the main maintainer for this tool, and so all the features we're talking about today have been added by me, and very happy to accept pull requests and issues and add more features.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't know about this page. I will explore it. And like for GIB, not GB, GB bytes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I also use it for my use.
Just to wrap up here, or at least with the demo portion, I'll talk about one more thing that Vantage is doing this year to help folks save money. And that is we've expanded Autopilot to be for RDS, Elastic-Cache, Redshift, and OpenSearch. And so I said at the beginning, you cannot sell out of reserved instances on these services, but and so we don't charge any fee for making these recommendations, and we also do not buy them for you automatically. So it's more of an approval-based workflow where you can go in and see how much you could buy to maximize your committed use spend. And then we'll actually give you a direct link into the AWS console to buy that. And so here's an example of what this looks like down here. And then this also works for RDS, Elastic-Cache, Redshift, and open source and OpenSearch. And then just one more screen here. This is what the commitment thing looks like. And so you can go in here, you can toggle the number of instances, you can see the right amount of savings, and you can essentially take the on-demand workloads that you have and make a decision that you're ready to save, in this case, up to $3,000 a month on a Redshift workload. So that would be dealing with the financial primitives of running on AWS. We've also talked about sort of the infrastructure things like shutting down instances and IOPS and perhaps archiving snapshots. This would be purely financial and won't actually touch any of your infrastructure. And then the part 3 of this is really query optimization and dealing with the actual data and workloads.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've noticed we completely dove into AWS only discussion. So like ignoring GCP and Azure.
That's true. Well, I'd be happy to come back and talk through some of the other things, because especially with GCP, I mean, this is not really a Postgres specific thing, but you get into BigQuery and Spanner, and potentially you're even using their new sort of like Postgres flavor of Spanner. And so there's a number of kind of interesting things you can do there that are unique to GCP. Azure, I would say, is, of course, they have their own database service. They have SQL Server. And so a lot of the unique database things on Azure are really based around SQL Server, although I believe they did acquire Citus Data. And so there's...
Right, exactly. They do a lot of Postgres lately.
Yeah, there's a fair amount
of people
of
who work there. So
It's true for Vantage. We started with AWS, and that's still today where we see most of our customers come in, and then Azure and GCP are new in Vantage as of last year.
Yeah, and Google improved a lot. My opinion about GCP Cloud SQL Postgres was very quite negative, I would say, like 4 years ago or so, because they provided, for example, only 8 knobs to tune settings. It's like, it's nothing. If you know how things work, you need more, because defaults are not good. And even if your cloud provider tune them, I also want to be able to adjust. But lately they improved a lot, and I know people who work at Cloud SQL, like very smart people, Postgres experts and so on. And they also released the AlloyDB, which is very interesting, like speaks Postgres, but not actually Postgres, with quite innovative ideas. So I think all 3 companies are quite strong in Postgres world these days. So, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Compatible world is interesting.
Yeah, and like EC2 instances, this service doesn't compare Google Cloud instances at all, right? Like N1, N2D, and so on.
That's true. So we today do not do a lot of cross-provider recommendations. We do have some features around comparing S3 and Cloudflare, but I would expect maybe to have more to say on that in the future.
Yeah.
Especially
would be great to compare everything, like absolutely
right.
everything.
I will say that EC2 instances actually now supports Azure, so there's a whole separate Azure section that you can get to. But
including Postgres service, or just
no, just the VM.
Just compute.
Yeah, so it's still in beta a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think our ambition is to have the most complete support for every cloud, and really help people make the best decision for their workload. And who knows, maybe that may involve on-prem even at some point in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Looking forward to using it. It's great. Okay, I think maybe that's it, right? So I think it was a fruitful discussion. Definitely, we didn't cover everything. We mostly focused on what your company is doing. It's very interesting and new to me, actually, because I'm the user of this service, which is free, and EC2 instance is free.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
But I only recently registered at vantage.sh, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm still exploring. So I hope people will try that service as well. And those who don't use the service maybe heard some ideas today, and I encourage everyone to participate in this document. Commenting is open. This is like a community effort. I consider this community effort and brainstorm. It will last. I mean, I will be reorganizing it and putting more ideas how to optimize infrastructure for Postgres. And that's actually maybe it. Thank you, Everett, for a very interesting discussion. People who watch on recorded, please subscribe and comment. We monitor comment section below, and likes, of course, and share with your colleagues, because I think these days it's a very important topic to study and apply, right? So, okay. Thank you again for coming. Have a good week. See you sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Bye.